I mean, but they exist for a reason. One of the easiest examples of what the reason would be is men are expendable. So we evolved to take stupid risks because a society cannot survive when 50% of its women are gone. But 50% of the men, 90% of the men can be gone and the society will survive. So we just evolved this way. But I think it's important to differentiate general differences. But then also there's individuals. So it doesn't mean that you can't be a man and be interested in the things that women generally are and vice versa. It just means that generally speaking, men tend to do these things and tend to like things, and women tend to like these things.
Yes.
And if we're going to understand each other, one of the worst ways to understand each other is deny that. You know, one of the most effective things I ever learned to help me communicate with, like, my wife, for example, was understanding some of those differences. I can't talk to my wife like she's a guy. She comes to me with a problem. She doesn't want me to solve it for her right away. Now, you know, Adam comes to me with a problem. I know why he's coming to me. He's like, give me some ideas, bro. What do I need to do? She just wants me to listen to her. Generally speaking, I read this, that women generally, they just want you to kind of hear them, whereas men just kind of want the answers. When I read that, I went and communicated that way, and it was amazing. Had I been like one of these people that's like, no, we're all the same, that would have caused problems.
And it's also funny because women don't like being treated like men.
Yeah.
Right? So for all this thing of like, here's another thing. I'm a fan of treating people fairly. I don't think treating everybody equally even makes sense. Right? Because no one actually does that, right? You don't treat your own family and children and friends the same way you treat strangers. That would be very weird, right? But I believe you can treat everyone fairly, right? But I think it's interesting because, yeah, people will say all that, but if you actually talk to a woman in the exact same way you talk to like a guy friend, like they don't like it. They don't like it. So there's always going to be I just think I think we're problematizing a lot of things that just aren't problems, right? Sometimes sometimes I do spots on TV or certain interviews or whatever, and I come back up and I'm like, what problem are we actually trying to solve here, right? Because you get lost in all these weeds and whatever, and I'm like, well, what's the problem? So say, for example, we were talking about like the gender thing or whatever. So someone will be, oh, you know, I don't know the stat. 20% of CEOs of the big companies only 20% of the CEOs are female, whatever. We need to da-da-da-da. And people go into all these things of how can this be addressed, how can be fixed. I'm like, so what's wrong with that? What's the problem? If 80% of CEOs are male and 20% are female, what is fundamentally the issue there?
Right.
Like, why is that bad? Why is that a problem? And people can't answer that because they just see the disparity and they're like, I'm like, well, you know, 99% of construction workers are male. 99% of sanitation workers and lumberjacks and people under the sewers and all. It's all men doing all these crappy jobs, crab fishing, all these jobs that no woman would want to do. Right. And it would sound nutty to be like, oh, we need to get 50% female representation in these things. And no one ever says that. But then on these other types of things, it's like, oh, we need this, we need that. And I'm just like, what are you trying to solve?
Do you think we've glamorized just how much money you make to the point where that now is how we look at value, and we've undervalued things like raising your kids or, you know, being maternal or, you know, those types of things that we used to say were feminine. It's like, well, oh, you raise your kids, you're a good mom. You should be making a lot of money because that's way more valuable. I think that's crazy. Do you think that's a problem?
I think that's a massive problem. And I think it's quite pathological, in fact. I think that it's so interesting how these conversations are framed. So, for example, coming back to the gender pay gap thing, what about the gender time gap, right? What about how much actual free time you have? What about how much time? Most fathers wish they had more time with their children and with their family, right? So you could easily spin this thing on its head, right? So they're all, you know, the men are making more. You're measuring everything by money, right? But it's like, okay, well, time is more valuable than money. And if you disagree with that statement, you know, consider if you'd, you know, swap places with an 80-year-old billionaire, right? And you wouldn't, especially an 80-year-old billionaire with terminal cancer. Absolutely no, you would not, because time is actually more valuable than money. Health is more valuable than money as well. So you could easily say, oh, like if I were being ridiculous, I could come up with some whole thesis of how men are oppressed by society and by the matriarchy because they don't get to spend as much time with their families and children because they're just these beasts of burden who are just out there and working, and you know, they're more expendable, they're dying in all these wars and whatever. You could easily spin it and come up with a frame that, oh, actually it's men who are oppressed in society, right? But I just recognize it as, look, human beings in general, we all have our challenges, and life is going to throw challenges. There are challenges that are somewhat unique or totally unique to each sex. That does exist, right? But I didn't make it that way. It's just that biology is biology, right? None of us are ever going to have a period or get pregnant or give birth or breastfeed for, like, we are somewhat detached from that. We can do our best to empathize and try to understand what that must be, what that must be like, but we're never going to get it, and we're never going to experience it, right? So those are some of the unique things that's just the female, the beauty and the struggle, right? Like, that's the superpower, something that life comes from women. Like, that's amazing. Everyone on earth was birthed from a woman. Incredible. Mothers are amazing. That's incredible. Men also have our own unique challenges and burdens that women are never going to totally get, right? Some of the duties that we just have, and some of the pressure on you to perform in your career and to make money and to be able to provide resources and protect them, all that stuff to the degree, as a man, like that's a unique, that's unique to men, right? Historically, whether it's hunting or it's fighting or it's what, like that's pretty much male domain. Women don't really need to think about that or worry about it. Even, I talked about this the other day on a podcast. I mean, a decent looking woman, even a not so decent looking one, can live her entire life and never even need to approach, like ask someone on a date or approach someone they're attracted to. As a man, like, if you don't do anything, nothing happens. You have to initiate, you have to approach, you have to face rejection, you have to do all of that stuff. You can't just stand, I'm just going to go to a bar and sit there and look pretty, right? It doesn't work. So there's just these differences, and that's fine. These aren't things I'm trying to fix. I'm not here like being a busybody, like we need to fix this and we need to fix that and fix that. It's just like, no, that's just how it is.
You just said something that we just talked before you got here about. I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this. Like, if you see a problem with this potentially in the future, I think the stats on Tinder, Sal, is what you brought up, are like 80% of the men get 20% of the women in there.
No, 20% of the men.
20% of the men get 80%.
Sounds accurate.
And do you foresee that as a potential problem? I mean, this is also the argument of monogamy and why we evolved to not have these societies where everybody sleeps with everybody, because eventually what would happen is a very small minority would get most all the women, and then you have all these angry men who can't have sex and can't reproduce that end up with war and fight against each other. So we're now actually doing that unintentionally through this new technology. Yeah. Do you see where that could potentially lead?
Yeah, it's funny because it's just cycles. As I said before, where human nature doesn't change, right? We've just got, the technology has now enabled. It's weird because it's, in a way, what you're describing, that phenomenon, is almost like a reversion back many centuries ago to where, top dudes just had like had a harem, and they had all these women, multiple wives, concubines, whatever, and then lower class men are just kind of there struggling or not getting or whatever, and we've just kind of come back full circle again in a slightly different
It's wild when you think of it like that, actually. Yeah. I mean, that we really are coming back to like the same way. So what does it lead to, I guess, is the question, is like.
Yeah, I think in the long term, it's not positive. Yeah. It's not positive. I mean, it destabilizes society. It's not by accident that every country and culture decided that marriage and raising children within that, monogamous structure is ideal, right? I mean, you don't think in all the thousands and thousands of years, people haven't tried this in all sorts of different
evolution
ways
of ideas.
People have tried all sorts of different things, and the one that's like, okay, the one that works and is stable and keeps society functioning and generally keeps people happy is, okay, one man, one woman, couple up, family, cool. That's the unit. That's the basis of society. And again, in our chronological snobbery, people are like, nah, I've got a better idea, right?
I can do it better.
Yeah, like we can do this whole thing better.
I love when people are like, we're so evolved because we do it this way. I was like, you're not evolved. It was tried a long time ago.
Yeah. And do you know what's so interesting is that you can see how these things actually play out. Yeah. So it's one thing to be theoretical with ideas and think, okay, well, we could try that, or that might work, or that might work. And if you actually, even with how people themselves would poll themselves, you actually find that the happy people who are, let me not even use the word happy, people who are genuinely like joyful and content, for the most part, of course, there's always exceptions, right? But for the most part, they tend to follow a more traditional path, right? Even with all the challenges and struggles and whatever that
the data shows
that come with it. Yeah, those people do tend to be long-term. They're happy. They're more stable. They're less likely to get lost in, drugs or alcoholism and vices.
Married people with children.
Yep.
Married people with children who are religious. Look at the data. They live longer. They're happier. They tend to be sick less.
Yes.
They tend to do better. And that's the person that we're like demonizing.